All right. Awesome. Felix, thanks again for allowing me to talk to you today. Um, I think, yeah, before we start, what we were talking about before I press record here. So, for those who are going to watch the video later on YouTube, they're definitely going to have an advantage on seeing what you're talking about because, like you said, looking at archaeological finds is very difficult if you can't see it. So for those listening, we'll try to, Dr. Loomer will try to describe it as best he can. But if you can access the YouTube version under the same name, that would be awesome. So I guess without further ado, just kind of the first thing to hit off the interview. Um, what are some sources that scholars can use to understand the cultic and or what we would call religious practices of Germanic peoples prior to the Viking Age?
Well, sure. Of course. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being willing to talk to me. Always a
Sure,
pleasure.
yeah.
Um, well, the evidence that is quite diverse. In fact, I mean, we could. I have some notes here. We can obviously start with archaeological evidence. We can go into climatological evidence, right? Some written evidence. Obviously, is a bit later, but I'm currently also teaching at the university a class on Old Nordic religion and belief. And one of the things that I try to make very clear is that what we think about being, however you want to call it, pre-Christian Scandinavian religion or, Old Nordic religion, what have you, it does not necessarily start with the Viking Age, right? There's a considerable body of evidence that predates the Viking Age. And so usually I start with, okay, so let's start in, the Stone Age, with the Ice Age coming to a close, the ice retreating further north, and then obviously the first animals going into Scandinavia, and the people, the hunters and gatherers, obviously following their prey. And it comes to a surprise then for some people that the first signs of potentially, cultic or religious practices dates to 12,000 BCE, which is quite some distance away from the Viking Age, right? And then obviously we
Oh,
are
yeah.
dealing mostly with artifacts such as jewelry. At that point in time, obviously mostly out of amber, like little amber figurines. Um, Talking about that, let me just try to get one of the slides going here. Just to need to find
Awesome.
them. Talking about the screen share window here, share. So you should be seeing this. This is through one of my slides here that I'm teaching. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Sorry
yeah.
for the
Perfect.
scrolling, but where are we?
No, yeah.
No, too far. Too far. Where are we? Here we are. So, um, no, still not right. You might need to cut this then later on. I'm sorry. Here we
No,
are.
no, don't worry about it. There.
Finally found the slide. Right.
Perfect.
These are some of the artifacts that we are talking then about, and again, this is in the context of my teaching. But what you're seeing here are artifacts made of amber that go way back. You see it on the slide there, 12,000 BCE, 9,000 BCE in Denmark and Sweden. And it just could be that these items are, some sort of jewelry, you know, nothing specifically religious about them. But you obviously could also go down the religious route and think about these things as important to the people, obviously, because otherwise they wouldn't have made them. And elk is obviously an animal that was hunted in the time, that was prey. And when you are subsiding on this animal, then it becomes very important. And when it is very important to your society, obviously you want in various by various means, you want to make sure that the animal is there in abundance for you to subsist, right? So how could you do this? For instance, by creating amulets and potentially then using these amulets in some ritualistic way or what have you, in kind of summoning the animal back to you or making it easier to hunt or to obviously proliferate, right? Because the more small baby elks there are, the more meat you can get, right? So this is also something that is very
Yeah.
important. And for instance, yeah, and then you see that this goes way back. I stopped the share for a second here, and then you have to, yeah.
Those real quick, those amulets, are they found mainly in graves, or I saw that you had something
Yeah,
about
that was just on the
graves.
slide because at times we were talking obviously about how people were buried in this point in time. I
Mhm,
don't know
mhm.
that they were found in a burial context. It might be, but again, these findings. They are now from Scandinavia, but we have them also from France and the British Isles.
Mhm.
So it is not something that is unique to Scandinavia, which is also something that is very interesting because it contextualizes what we are having, because a lot of the evidence is rather ambiguous. I can later on when we are talking about rock carvings, for instance, I can show you some of the more ambiguous things that are going on. But
Yeah,
context is very important for us to make sense of what we are seeing there.
of course.
Further material is obviously then becoming way later now, dealing with the Iron Age and Bronze Age. We have a lot of wetland depositions of weapons, animal carcasses, ships, the
The
bark
bog bodies.
bodies, exactly, oak coffins that have been preserved
Mm,
with their bodies inside, graves in general, and surely also rock carvings and picture stones, which are then obviously a bit more ambiguous.
yeah,
When it comes to climatological evidence, it is obviously interesting to see how different the landscape was, if at all. And what we see is that for the most part, the regions that we are looking at were until 500 BCE were quite wetter. So the water level was
mm,
higher, up to at times 15, 20 meters higher, so like considerably higher, which obviously also has an impact on the landscape. So you would see more lakes, more bogs, wetland in essence. And when you have a specific environment, that might obviously also impact on your cultic behavior, on your religious behavior, as you have seen, for instance, when I mentioned wetland depositions, right? You are offering or sacrificing things to water because there is an abundance of water. And then you can obviously
yeah,
ask yourself the question, what is it then about the water that is so important to these people? Does something live there in the water? Or, in a sense of a deity or deities or spirits or what have you? Or can we see in a sense a dichotomy being established here between the living that live on dry land and the dead that rest in the water, referring again back to bog bodies, for instance.
yeah. So sort of like the water being this, like a portal in some sort of
Yeah, right.
sense.
In yeah, some kind of liminal space where you are somewhere in between. You're not, because some of the bog bodies that we have, they show signs of being deliberately fastened or weighed down, so that they
Do you have any
I
pictures of
can show you
those?
some of those. Maybe before I show them, you might want to have a disclaimer. Yeah.
Ah, yeah, 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 sure. So, yeah, these are going to be pictures of deceased deceased beings. So definitely, if that makes you
Yeah, they
uncomfortable,
look a lot
probably.
like mummies. So
Yeah,
they are
yeah,
very uneery, and I do not really like looking at them. But this is obviously one of the bullets that I have to take to the knee, right, when teaching about this.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And they, I mean, I remember because taking your class last year, I remember they are very well
it is
preserved.
amazing the amount of preservation that the tannic acid has. Yeah. So I will start the screen share here. Um, there we are. This is, for instance, the so-called Tollund man. He was found in Tollund, which is in Jylland in Denmark. And you
Mm.
can see here um, his entrails being preserved. And that preservation is so good that we know what his last meal was. And if we go further down, here are some slides of when he was dug up initially. Right, you can see him here on the slides.
Oh yeah.
A better picture here, maybe, from when he was unearthed. And what obviously for in these both bodies now for us very interesting is this person did not die a natural death. He was killed. And he has a very prominent noose around his neck, which is also preserved. So hence we know that he was either hanged or garroted, strangled, however you want to call it. But since the
Mhm.
rope is still quite considerably, I think you can see it here, quite good. Um,
Oh yeah.
he might be hanged or hung. I don't know what you prefer. And
Yeah. I mean, you can still see his
yeah,
facial
it is.
hair.
Yeah, you can still see his facial hair. It is amazing the amount of preservation. Maybe you can see it here a bit. Here you can still.
Yeah, in this
Yes,
position that
yes,
he's in.
it is very remarkable. Also, you see here very good the preservation, right, with his skin still, the leather cap, quite
Yeah.
amazing. And when obviously when you see this is now 100 AD or CE, no, it's BC, sorry. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you have people that are hung, clearly, deliberately killed,
Yeah.
and that are then deposited into a bog. It makes you wonder as to why would this have been done? And you can come up with some ideas, right? Well, it could be a murder victim that was then, just hushed away in a bog somehow. It could be an accident, bogs are very treacherous landscape, so people might just go missing in a bog. Not in this case, obviously, but
Yeah.
but still, you might find just people, vanishing in bogs, or people being murdered and then again hushed away in bogs. In this instance, obviously, it seems to be two other options. Either we are dealing here with a person that was punished for a crime, so a criminal that was then executed, or if you're inclined to see this as something more religious, he might have been
Mm.
sacrificed.
Yeah.
Now, strangulation is something that we find in Old Nordic religion with a particular deity, right? Odin and his self sacrifice. We have other stories later on with Starkaður and his mock sacrifice of King Vikar, which is also done by hanging. So there are potential connections that you could do here, right? It's like, does this have to do something with being ritually killed as a sacrifice to Odin? Maybe then by that point in time it might obviously be way too early to talk about Odin. Might be some proto Odin, like some notion that might then
Yeah.
develop into what we become known. What would he become known in the Viking Age then is known.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the hanging bodies in
Yeah,
Gamla or
yeah,
something.
yeah, exactly. Gamla Uppsala is another. This is now then in Sweden, but people were
Yeah.
hung as sacrifices in groves. if we take this as at face value, the descriptions then. But if we want to continue, you have a graubolle here, and Borremose. So people are being killed by strangulation and put in box. Here we have again the rope preserved very well with the Borremoseman, and it has been suggested that it looks kind of like a torque, like a specific kind of necklace.
That's very interesting.
Huldremose, again, strangulation. Very well preserved clothes. And then the very interesting bog body, the Vindeby boy. Yeah, which was initially sexed as a girl, but then got reanalyzed and now turned out to be a boy, which is quite remarkable. We don't know whether or not he was, strangled or not. But remarkably, he has a strip of cloth over his eyes. It could just be, some kind of hairband that fell down through the time. If it is not a hairband, but in a sense a blindfold, we could again infer something criminal, right? Because even in our modern times, some people are executed, they are getting, a paper bag or a paper cloth or what have you over their eyes before they're executed. It could also be something more in line with magic. For instance, the fear of the evil eye or something, when this person was understood to have some magical capabilities. It could very well be that before he was killed, that they put a blindfold over his eyes so that they were not subjected to a kind of evil stare. We have these things being depicted in saga literature, where sorcerers and witches are killed, but only after they have a cloth over their head. In Hrafnkels saga Freyskoða, it is also done with a horse. So the superstition is not exclusively relating to humans. Yes.
Humans.
And I mean, even the English language has still, putting the wools over somebody's eyes. So there might be, again, you have the evidence. These people unfortunately don't talk to us anymore. So we have to infer from comparative material. However, this comparative material, there might still be some 500 years between, some 1,000 years between. But still, it is quite interesting, the resemblance that there is in some of these finds.
Yeah, and it seems that those bodies all seem to be around the same time frame.
Yeah, you have some. Obviously, dating might be a bit. How do you say, a bit difficult. There are some discrepancies in the dating, but yeah, you usually have something that is around, in a roughly 200-year time frame, 500-year time frame, depending on how far you get the differences in there, in the discrepancies in there. You get some 700 bodies, not only within Scandinavia, but also then obviously the British Isles, Ireland. We also have some from the Netherlands, but then again, it is a problem with dating. A lot of these might be, 15th, 16th century. So this is then maybe not necessarily relevant to the topic at hand.
Do we see a timeline of when this practice of placing, whether it be the dead or a sacrifice, human or object or whatever, do we see a time period when that stops in the archaeological record?
Yes, we do. As if we made notes, right? As if we came prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. We have a very severe event happening. And this can be quite easily dated to roughly 536 AD, when there appeared to have been either one or two volcanic eruptions or a series of volcanic eruptions happening in the Americas, which were quite impactful in the global scale on the climate. And then what we are seeing as a result of these volcanic eruptions is some kind of volcanic winter, something akin to a nuclear winter that you might think of. So obviously, huge ash cloud that impedes the sunlight, layers of ash which make barren the soil, and obviously, as a consequence of the reduction of sunlight, temperatures are plummeting, which in turn leads to severe winters. And the scientific record is quite substantial. So we have a lot of ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica that show the evidence of an acidic dust whale during this time period. We have dendrochronological evidence, tree data. Let's call it tree data, which we have from Ireland, Sweden, Finland, Siberia, you name it, which indicate that trees in this period show minimal growth. So something must have impacted their growth. Historical accounts, we have some Irish annals that are mentioning that there are hardly any crops and that there is a shortage, a severe shortage of bread in the years 536 to 539 AD. We have Procopius of Caesarea, who is mentioning a thick fog suffocating the sun. So obviously there is a lot of evidence that something severe happened that impacted the climate.
Yeah, from several different regions and cultures, there is a consensus.
And we also have it obviously in Old Norse mythology.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so some of your listeners might be already familiar with Old Norse mythology to a large extent, and might have heard of a term called fimbulvetur, which is, depending on what sources you consult, either in Vafthrûdnismál it is used for Ragnarök, so the end of the gods, or in Gylfaginning, so with Snorri Sturluson, it is used as a sort of precursory event which leads up to Ragnarök. And I have the section here. Then spoke Gangleri, what information is there to be given about Ragnarök? I have not heard tell of this before. And then Haur says, there are many important things to be told about it. First of all, that a winter will come called Fimbul winter. And Fimbul is something that is either great or mighty. You could also call it, something magically mighty. Then snow will drift from all directions. There will then be great frosts and keen winds. The sun will do no good. There will be 3 of these winters together and no summer in between. So we have a prolonged winter, no sun, hardly any, again, infertility of the ground, a great tragedy all around. And obviously, if you're reading this, it reminds you of such a catastrophic event as took place in 536 AD. And obviously, this is not something that is done within a year, right? And ash or the dust whales that need some time to dissipate. So you will have some years of impediment and hardship regarding your fertility of the soil, your crops, uncertainty. And it might also be very psychologically damaging, right? Because up to that point, the evidence that we are having shows clearly that Old Nordic religions or systems of beliefs, as another topic, how you want to phrase it, were obviously bound to the nature, right? We had it. You are outside, you are depositing in wetlands, so lakes are revisited time and again. The nature plays an important part. The sun is very important. And then seemingly for you, out of the blue, this all goes away, right? So the sun doesn't work anymore. Fertility, the nature doesn't work anymore. So it is a hugely impactful, psychologically, religiously, and obviously climatologically, socially, you name it. It impacts all facets of life.
So then it's, I mean, we can pretty much presume, or I mean, perhaps there's some doubt, but there's a good chance that the old Nordic eschatology, this idea of the winter, could have been some sort of remnant of a cultural memory.
Certainly, because something like this you will remember. And this is not something that
Yeah.
will be forgotten in a lifetime. You will be telling stories about this time and again, because again, this is such a huge event. And it is also something that, apart from obviously all the archaeological evidence and the one part in Gylfaginning that I just mentioned, that we also see elsewhere, right? For instance, we have picture stones, mostly found in Gotland.
Okay.
And we have the earliest type, which is roughly dated to, say, 400 to 600, AD, CE, it's like give or take, in which you have a sun symbol, which is very prominent on some of these stones.
Could you pull some of these
Yeah,
up?
of course.
Even if it
Yeah,
takes a
it
second.
would
Yeah,
take a
it's
second.
absolutely. And so you see these sun symbols sort of disappearing.
Yes,
Is that
that
what
is
you're?
obviously what I'm hinting at.
Yeah.
Again, this is from my teaching slides here. Screen share. There we are. And obviously you have these circular structures, these circular circles, let's call
Yeah.
them that. These circles
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
these are the sun, and you see they are quite prominent on these picture stones, right here. This one is the Sander Church 4 one is very interesting because you appear to have a tree here, and then you have a line, the sun above, and then something below. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, the sun is very prominent on these. I can also go back again, right? And the sun does not appear really after in any subsequent types. This obviously taken alone might just be, people got tired of it, maybe new influence, maybe some new artsy style. Okay, this is now how we do it, something like this. But when you obviously think about something like AD 536 happening, then it puts it more into correlation that there actually might be something happening, why the sun is not being put so prominently on these picture
Yeah.
stones, because it failed.
And you mentioned that during this time, maybe mythologically, we could assume a shift in what deities played in importance, like this, this connection to the land and landscapes, and maybe old deities, Nerthus, and all of these that played some sort of importance with the landscape. And now all of a sudden, people are going inside.
Yeah,
Like,
Nethus is obviously a very interesting thing, but I think she deserves a podcast for herself.
yeah, we can have you back in the future
Well,
talking about.
okay, sure, I'll take it. Talking
Yeah.
about Nethus, but yeah. Anyway, to go back to this, sure, you can suggest that this event, the dust whale or the volcanic eruptions, the nuclear winter, however you want to phrase it, is way more impactful on Old Nordic religion and belief than the advent of Christianity is. Because when the advent of Christianity, you are basically having, one set of deities and you just exchange it, or you just correlate it to Christianity, and then you say, oh, your ancestors, your grandparents, they believed in this and that, but actually, what they kind of believed in is, and then insert whatever Christian model
Right.
somewhat correlates to whatever Old Norse model. But here what we are seeing is that basically the landscape in essence is given up. Why? Obviously, again, because of the fertility ceasing, the sun ceasing. And I have some numbers here. There's an interesting study done by Gräslund and Price, who went through settlement and settlement abandonment in that time in Sweden. And it is just catastrophic what is happening here. Some numbers in Uppland. So we are dealing with central eastern parts of Sweden, Uppland. 75% of farms are being abandoned. Öland, which is you have Gotland, which is an island, and Öland is also a small island closer to mainland Sweden, a bit southern.
Right.
1,300 farms. On Gotland, 1,900 farms. In Rogaland, the region of Norway, 180 out of 440 settlements abandoned, which is roughly 41%. So you see that there is a social upheaval. People cannot sustain their farms anymore. So what are they doing? Obviously, some of them might die, as unfortunate as it is, but those that survive, obviously, they huddle together, they congregate.
Mm.
And where do they congregate to? Obviously, to larger settlements, areas and spheres of influence, people that have maybe a retinue that can protect you against raiders, that can protect your crops, your animals. And then obviously we start the emergence of what is usually referred to as central places, which
Mm-hmm.
is the settlements surrounding a chieftain settlement. So you have a prominent settlement where a chieftain resides, and then you get some other settlements dotted around that, right? So you might get a settlement for warriors, or a settlement where the smith is living, or a settlement for a harbor or something like that, some trade going on, maybe a religious site or several religious sites in the vicinity. And these are done by what is called toponymy or toponymous evidence, basically place names.
Mm-hmm.
So you see then
Right.
a place name ending in Horf, and then you look around, oh, okay, so we have a village that is called Karleby close by, so the warriors' settlement or village. And then you have Smithby. Okay, yeah, that's where the smith lived. And then from there you can see, okay, so people are congregating to spheres of power. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when you are leaving landscape and when you are leaving behind your lake that you have visited for 300, 600 years ago, you still need your religion. You still need somewhere to express that. And what we are seeing then in the wake of 536 AD is that the role of the women ceases, so or diminishes rather.
Mm.
Female figures were very important before. We have it in engraves and other figurines that have been found, rock carvings. Women can play an important role, as did the landscape. But this ceases. So men take over. And because nature has become unreliable, you need to go elsewhere. The next logical step is you go from the outside to the inside. But also something that you do is
Right.
because the landscape, the lake doesn't move. You move. And once you abandon the landscape as something very important for your religion and you move inside, you also make something with this religion, other than obviously moving inside, you making it in a sense portable. It can move around with you. So this is also something that is very interesting. It also leads to the emergence of a kind of chieftain priest conglomeration where the head of a society may also be its spiritual leader. So
Right.
there are hugely important upheavals that are happening, which reshape how we have to think about Old Nordic religion after this event. Then,
Yeah, I'm sort of reminded then of and I think you had mentioned it too in the class, but think Neil Price had an article on the Sutton Hoo helmet and this idea of, the leader putting on a helmet like this and becoming Odin
Yeah.
in the hall.
Um, yeah. So this obviously has to do now with ritual performance, but obviously we can talk about this for a second. So,
Yeah.
as I said, people congregated and found spheres of power revolving around a chieftain. Now, the chieftain obviously wants to retain his power or wants to. Hello, camera. I have become unsharp. There we are. Now in focus again. Sorry for that. So the chieftain either wants to retain power or wants to expand his sphere of influence, which obviously leads to warfare. Now, with warfare being an important aspect of diplomacy, you need people that are willing to die for you. And you need to sell this somehow. Because in essence, if I'm a chieftain, say, and I want to conquer a neighboring chieftain because maybe their land is more fertile or they have more cows or pigs or livestock, that was the word, thank you. They have more livestock and you want to suck this up for your own, then obviously I need to sell to you as my warrior, hey, this is a good thing to do. You might die in the process, but obviously this is a risk that I am willing to take. And then you might ask yourself, it's like, why do I need to die for 5 cows? Right? What is the benefit for me? And then I can say, okay, it's just like I give you gold in return. Well, you can only do so much with gold, especially if you're dead. So afterlife becomes very important. And this obviously ties back into this Sutton Hoo helmet, say, and Odin and ritual performance. So I want to impose my will on you, and I do this by saying various things. And obviously tying this to religion and thoughts of afterlife is a very, very good tool. And how do I do this? Now, obviously that I'm a chieftain, but I am also, in a sense, a religious leader. And I tie these two together by, for instance, using a helmet. A helmet is obviously kind of a mask, in a sense.
Yeah.
And when you are putting on a helmet, you are becoming somebody else. You might have done this as well in your life, putting on a helmet and then you're becoming somebody else, a warrior, a fighter, something. Obviously, it also hides your identity, so it makes it easier to become whatever it is that you want to become. And very interestingly, with the Sutton Hoo helmet, as you said, one eye lights up. So it is a helmet that has a complete face guard. So it only shows like both of your eyes, and on one of the eyes it has some stones or evidence of stones behind it, which in fire or in light would light up. So you would have one dark eye and one lit up eye, which obviously ties nicely into Odin. And because of there being a face protection, also my voice changes. So I'm not only looking differently, but also I am sounding differently to underline that I am not your chieftain Felix anymore, but I am, in fact, Odin. Now, by transforming into Odin, I'm not only becoming the deity, but I do various things. Firstly, I change the surrounding as well, right? When you think about me becoming Odin, putting on the helmet in a hall, I might change the hall into a different place, kind of like Valhöll, potentially. If it were outside, I might change whatever it is, into a battlefield or something like that. I change you. You are a warrior, but you are then the warrior of Odin, right? You might become an Einherji, right? So what I then do is I take you and transform you as well. But I don't only do this, because the notion is that Einherjar are already dead, they have already died. I basically say, it's like, look, you don't have to fear anything. You don't have to fear death because you are already dead. You are already
Yeah.
an einherji. And obviously, if you're not afraid of death, you might find it easier to fight and actually be more proficient on the battlefield. Because again, what do you have to lose? You have lost your life already. So you don't have to lose that anymore. So you're
Yeah.
basically taking away one of the greatest fears. You're sapping this, you're nipping this right in the butt. And this is a very, very powerful tool.
Wow. I mean, it's phenomenal to think about the idea of, the hall becoming this central place, but then also revealing itself and sort of remaining in the mythology even afterwards. Because like you had mentioned, this idea of Valhalla is probably one of the most well-known motifs of
Yeah,
Norse myth. And when people think of Vikings, they think of, this, "Well, I'm going to go to Valhalla." And it's interesting to see how this idea perhaps even developed as almost as a survival necessity to come together, and then it ends up reflected in their
exactly.
beliefs.
But also, again, the prominence of Valhalla now might be simply due to the written sources, the written evidence that has come down to us, and obviously the people that wrote that and the people that preserved it. Because a lot of the
Mhm.
evidence that we're having is skaldic poetry. So regarding Valhalla, right? So there is
Yeah,
obviously an emphasis by chieftains, by skalds, to preserve that kind of knowledge because they are
absolutely.
both in essence are profiting from it. So our sources might be skewed towards this because this is the most prominent social class in a sense that is how do you say?
Yeah, yeah.
Prolific.
It's
Thank you. That was
prolific.
the word. It is prolific, and there's also a great, um, how can you say, incentive to preserve this knowledge and to
Hmm.
distribute this knowledge. So our sources might be skewed towards this, right? Because
Right.
you
Because
that's
that's
what's
what's
left.
left.
Exactly. We don't know what a 10th century Danish farmer thought.
Yeah.
That is obviously one of the great
Yeah.
tragedies then. But yeah, it is very interesting what these people were capable of doing as they saw that their previous ways, in a sense, failed. Quite remarkable.
I guess I guess that leads me to sort of the final thing I wanted to ask you. I mean, and really this is just
Yeah.
open ended, but just talking about common misconceptions about Norse myth and like how you as a scholar in the field of Old Nordic belief, like based on your research or people that you've talked to, how does the scholarly view differ from maybe the common misconceptions out
So
there?
I've noted down 2 points that I would like to address.
Perfect.
Um, one of them is the use quite often in popular media, but you see it also in scholarly works, the use of Viking religion to whatever
Mm,
it is that we are doing. Obviously, it is a very, very catchy term. It gives it great saleability. Right? Yeah, Viking religion. It's like, oh, Vikings and their religion, and which obviously builds on the sand foundation of what a Viking is and how it is understood, which might be different in scholarly circles than it is elsewhere.
hmm
And the idea is this is like the first lecture I do in my class that I teach is it's like, okay, let's just discuss, what is a religion, and can we talk about old Nordic religion or pre-Christian Scandinavian religion? It's like, is this a religion even, right? Can we think about this as being a unified belief system, right? Can I say with certainty that a farmer in southern Denmark has the same understanding of the mythology as a fisherman in northern Norway.
Probably
Exactly,
not.
probably not, because there are
Yeah.
so many different aspects that might impact on how you perceive of the mythology, right? Your profession, your sex, the time
Hmm.
when you are living, where you are living. You might live, in the village next over, but there might be like two mountain regions in between. And then it's like, obviously, this can impact on the mythology that in one valley, there might be differences compared to the next valley. So
Right.
is it even worth, or does it even lead to anything if we say religion in the singular? Or do we need to talk about religions? And once you go down that rabbit hole, then is it even worth to be called a religion, or are we talking about a system of belief or even systems of beliefs, right?
Exactly.
So when you say Viking religion, it obviously feels to me as though you were talking about the religion that this kind of warrior band, these 550 or like 150 men that sailed somewhere to raid somewhere had. And then you're like, yeah, but even they might not have had the same understanding, depending on whether they were from Denmark or from Norway, right? They might have had differences even then. So Viking religion, at least to me, is kind of an empty term because it doesn't say anything. It is
Yeah.
used as a catch-all phrase, but then again, does it even address what we are talking about? And I would argue no. So pre-Christian Scandinavian religion might be very, apt. Same as Old Nordic religion. It depends on how far you want to go back, right? Old Nordic religion, again, goes back, way back, right? We're talking then about Stone Age, even. Pre-Christian Scandinavian religions might not go that far back in time.
And as we'll talk about in the future, I mean, we have examples perhaps of goddesses turning into gods, and stay tuned. But
Yeah, that is a thing. Yeah, they might change sexes in between. They might not, depending
yeah,
on whether or not you want to follow one scholar's interpretation of a name. And
yeah,
and another thing that is somewhat different. It's still debated in our field. The idea of an Old Nordic pantheon, where you have
hmm,
Odin as the main deity, and then trickling down from there. Do we really have this, right? Does Odin really appeal to everybody? Also, again, through the ages, is Odin really very important to a farmer? Or might not, Thor or Freyr be more important to a farmer? Likewise, for a warrior, might not Thor or Freyr be more important? Because both of them also have warrior aspects to them, right? Thor famously
yeah,
kills giants for breakfast. Um, this is something that came up, in the 1700s, for instance, with who was it? Artgrimur Jonsson and his Grimogaea, and then Finnur Magnusson, obviously, some centuries later. The correlation between Nordic and classical Greek or classical Roman, depending on how you want to phrase it, religions, and then the notion of, okay, Greek pantheon is there, and then obviously in the Norse we need to compare it because we are just as great
yep,
as the classical religions. Of course we are, um, and then you start to building, in a sense, a pantheon where there might not have been one. Granted, you obviously have Odin as a very important deity. But for who is it important? Again, for the chieftains and for the skalds.
hmm,
But these are also the people that preserve the written evidence for the most part. So, what I was
exactly.
talking about earlier with a skewed kind of perception. Yes, you might get Alföður, right? The All Father as a kenning for Odin. But then again, who applies these kenningar? The skalds, right? And for whom are they applying this? For a deity that they might find appealing
The person employing them.
as well, right?
Yeah.
So, for instance, in Sweden, Freyr is very important, arguably even more important than Odin.
Hmm.
So is he supposed to be the main deity in Sweden, or just in general? It's like how does it work, right? Can we even think about there being something that is hierarchical to begin with? And I sometimes find it interesting, when you scroll through social media or something, and then everybody's like, "Oh yeah, the warriors of Odin, hail Odin!" And then you're like, is it though, right? Because Odin, in essence, is a very capricious deity. He's very fickle. He
Yeah.
can grant you victory, but he can also very easily just by a mood swing.
Yeah, he can
Yeah,
break your
exactly,
sword.
right. So he is not that kind of a deity that I would want to rely on in my everyday life. And also, he does nothing for farming, he does nothing for fishing. He sits there drinking wine, speaking in riddles all day. It's like, how
Hmm.
appealing can this be to the average Joe?
Exactly. And I mean, as you mentioned earlier in the episode,
Oh
place
yeah,
names,
another thing,
right?
place names. Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
look in the Book of Settlements, right? Landnama book for the Icelanders. How many names are there with Thor? Even in modern Iceland, right? You can combine Thor with almost everything there is, right? As a name.
People
Yeah.
named
You,
Thor,
you have
you know.
Sæþór, Bergthor, Borgthor, Thor, and then obviously Thordís, right? You have also female names with this. All the Thor place names that there are. For Odin, what do you have? Oh yeah, you have Odinse. Great. And then personal names, well, you can have Odin, and then there is a very obscure Odin Kaur, which I've asked Icelanders, they have never
Hmm.
heard of this. So,
Yeah, I've only seen one. There was a baby that was named Odin that I saw
yeah,
like
okay.
last year, and that's the only person
Uh,
I've ever seen named Odin.
in my not teaching job, I have a colleague whose name is Odin. But yeah, it is very interesting to see even now the prominence of, for instance, Thor. So at least in
Yeah,
Iceland, Odin is not the main deity. Odin is not the guy. There's not one place name in Iceland that has anything to do with Odin. So again, who brings these myths over here to Iceland? Is it really Odin? But then where is he? Right? He cannot be that influential,
yeah,
at least in Iceland. And then again in Sweden, it is very interesting food for thought here to think about. Can we talk about one deity really being the main deity, the main guy for everybody? And then throughout the ages, very interesting to just, ponder these things.
absolutely. Well, Felix, thank you so much for agreeing to be
Sure,
on here
anytime. Thanks for
today.
having me.
And yeah, all the information, it was
All right,
great. And for those of you listening, like if you have any questions for Felix or anything that you want to hear in future episodes, please reach out and let me know.
also just write me an email, message me,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, I will. I'll actually, like I said, put some of your works in the
Oh yeah,
description
I've written
section
stuff.
of the. Yeah,
Yeah, I've done that too. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah,
thank you
thanks for having me.
again,
It's always a
Felix.
pleasure talking to you.